So I'll introduce myself. I'm Stephanie Gonzalez. I'm currently a solo practitioner, but I was in the public interest community forever, I think. I worked at Community Legal Services, Philadelphia Legal Assistance, before I went out on my own, had kids. Okay, but because of my background, I've stayed pretty connected to the Hispanic community, and in particular because undocumented families don't have a lot of access to free legal services. Somehow my small little law firm has become, I'd say half my clients are undocumented immigrants for various forms of family law needs that they have. So thanks to SEBA for having me. Will Gonzalez asked me to come and talk about planning for children in the event the parents or other caretaker are detained or deported. This is a topic, it went around a lot. I saw it in the media extensively a little more than a year ago. There was a lot of discussion, maybe at the beginning of 2017, really, about what are we going to do? We have a new administration. Everybody's going to get deported. What's going to happen to these kids? We don't want them all in foster care. So depending on the state you were in, there may be a guardianship law, something that can be done for the children, a law in place, forms already available. We don't have that in Pennsylvania. So some of us started thinking, okay, what are we going to do? And so back then, well, it's almost 2 years ago at this point, we started putting together forms, what makes sense, what does Pennsylvania have, what doesn't it have? If it doesn't have something we need, let's make it up and see if it's going to work, okay? So if you're watching this training, my guess is you're planning to help somebody plan for their children, okay? Now, you don't have to be a family law person to do this. Lots of people are scared of family law. I'm scared of tax law. But you don't need to be trained in family law, but the first thing you should know is you have to look at the whole family. This is not an area where you can just fill out a few forms, fill in some names, and boom, you're good, okay? You do have to do an assessment. And slide 12, I'm told, has my checklist to kind of, and we're going to go through all of it, but on slide 12, you should print it out. And the forms, I think, will be available elsewhere in a more PDF-friendly format. But if you go to talk to someone, you're going to need to print out that form to help think through the different variations that could occur and the issues you're going to have to spot. Not everyone can do a guardianship type designation for the children in their care. Okay, so that's the most important thing. Before we get there, let's talk a little bit about who you're going to encounter. Some of you may be very familiar with immigrant families, some of you may not. Okay, we have a fair number of mixed status families. What that means is maybe the parents aren't documented, but the kids are citizens. And you're always going to want to look at who's who and who has what, because what happens to the children, the possibilities for the children are different depending on whether they're citizens or not, for example, or have some other form of legal status here. You also certainly may encounter whole families who are undocumented, and in such a case, the children, depending on where they are at the time that the parents are detained, may or may not also be detained. There's been a lot of fear in the community about what's ICE going to do with my children? What are my children going to foster care? Just because I've been detained, does that mean my children are automatically going to foster care and I'll never see them again? I don't know that there's any official policy pronouncements, but I can tell you from my conversations in southeastern Pennsylvania, the Department of Human Services in Philadelphia certainly does not seem to have an interest in wholesale rounding up children just because the parents have been detained and put them in foster care. I mean, think about it practically, right? Like how many foster care houses do they have? You know, just from a practical perspective. If DHS is called by ICE, they're going to first look to see, is there some appropriate guardian relative out there? So they're not just going to warehouse kids. In each county outside of Philadelphia, there's generally an agency called Children and Youth Services. That's CYS on my outline. And I'm going through, I don't know what slide I'm on. I'm going through my outline. I'm on slide 2. The policies may be different, but you're always going to have the practical issue of, just how many foster families and beds do they have, right? In general, the dependency system is overwhelmed with children in need of care. So children who are not really at risk there's not going to be an institutional reason to take those kids into care, okay? There's also a lot of misinformation in the community. The biggest one, and the reason we put this, myself and others put this whole packet together, although everything you see today I put together, but a lot of people believe, I'll get a poder, right? That's the word we use. I'll get a poder, that's a power of attorney. It'll look like something I might use in my country, my home country, and a notario, a notary will sign it, and it'll be beautiful. They'll prepare it and sign it, and that will fix all my problems in case something happens to me. That's the biggest source of miscommunication. In Pennsylvania, that's not going to work. I saw a couple of articles, presentations rather, on Univision and some of the other Latino news agencies, talking about in California, don't get ripped off by the notaries, just go get this form filled out and have it notarized. That's California. California actually, and we'll see that later, actually has a law about this. Pennsylvania does not. So it started going around the community here in Philadelphia, don't pay any lawyers, don't pay any notaries, just get this easy poder. There were even community agencies passing around this simple poder, and I have a sample in the documents later. Hopefully that is online. Don't use that. This stuff, particularly if you're talking about international travel with children, those are complex issues. You can't just get on a plane and send a kid out of the country. There's all types of issues of parental abduction, trafficking of children. So a lot of this stuff is not so easy, and a simple poder is not going to do the trick in very many cases. So what is the law in Pennsylvania? I've been saying first and foremost, there is no guardianship of children in Pennsylvania. It doesn't exist in Pennsylvania. There is guardianship of the person and the estate. If someone's incapacitated, an elder maybe, you can go and get guardianship of their belongings or their person. I included in your materials, the documents are numbered 1 through 24. And if you don't see them right now, at some point you'll have them, okay? Number 1, palawhelp.org has a great little packet it was authored by it's the Pennsylvania Legal Aid Network, for those of you who aren't familiar. It's a statewide legal services organization. They have a great two-page document on their website. It kind of outlines what a power of attorney is. This is the poder. What a power of attorney is, what it can and what it cannot do. And you see right there on the first page, can I use a power of attorney to authorize someone else to care for my child? No, you cannot. No more, and this is something that's always a surprise to people, right? If you're a parent, you're like, oh, I better plan for my kids and my will in case something happens to me. Can't do that in Pennsylvania. It's not valid. And that's a big surprise to everybody for some reason, but that's not doable here. So I would read through, if you're just interested in power of attorney in general, because people who are deported may have property or other things that might require some form of power of attorney, but it doesn't work for the kids. Okay?
Pause for 1 second. We're having a
I'm going to pause. Can people still see me? Oh, excellent. Okay. Well, can they hear me?
Yeah, I think they can hear you. I think they just couldn't. Yeah, they can hear you, but just they couldn't see the slides. So
okay.
And they can see them.
All right. Oh, well, I should have talked. I can talk all day.
Yeah.
All right.
Now we're good. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, back to me talking. So I just talked about powers of attorney. Okay. Next, I found this other document. This is document number 2. This is posted on the Lancaster, Pennsylvania Family Court website, which I was shocked. I find guardianship information, even in temporary guardianship, even though I know it doesn't exist in Pennsylvania, but I guess if you're out in Lancaster, you can get something. So you always do want to look at your local courts. Who knows, maybe somebody has something. And they have this whole website and about a portion of their website which describes what you can do. And this does not apply specifically to undocumented individuals. This is I don't know what they do out there in Lancaster, but okay. So another thing in terms of the status of the law in Pennsylvania, so I put in the bit about Lancaster to show you sometimes some places, especially when you're talking about family law, things may work that you don't expect to work. So look around at your local resources because you never know. The third document I have, well, actually, let me step back. I did not include any samples of healthcare powers of attorney, financial powers of attorney. If those things are needed for adults, you're going to that would be outside of the scope of planning for the kids. Okay. There is, however, something called, this is document number 3. This is called the Medical Consent Act. This exists in Pennsylvania. This is for anyone. If you want someone else to be able to consent for medical treatment for you for a period of time, we have a whole statute. This is document number 3. And this is part of the sample caregiver designation packet that is part of this training. So what I did, I just, retyped it. There's a form here. I've given you, for your attorneys who are watching, here's the act. But there is a form that goes with it, and that is a portion of my packet. The closest thing in Pennsylvania that comes to anything like guardianship, there is the Standby Guardianship Act in Pennsylvania. This is part of family law. This only applies when the parent is terminally ill. Okay, so that is not going to apply to most of the undocumented families who are being deported. But since we do have this law, when I was making up my caregiver designation form, I modeled this. This is kind of where it comes from. I've given you guys document number 4 is an article written by the AIDS Law Project of Pennsylvania way back in the day. Let me give props, shout out my girl, Catherine Miller Wilson, who's now the executive director of HIAS, back when she was doing family law when we were young and bright-eyed. She was helped author this piece of legislation. And so we still have it. But again, this only applies to terminal illness. I include it because you will see standby guardianship in other states, but it's different there. It's not the same thing that we have because in other states, it's not limited only to terminal illness. Okay. So a lot of people, I gave you both the article is document number 4 and the standby guardianship law itself is document number 5. Okay. A lot of people want to talk about shared custody. Should I go ahead and just give custody to, my cousin or my sister who's here and is really close to my children? That's a hard decision. I mean, people don't want to give away custody of their children, right? And once you go down that path, let's say you don't get deported, right? Hopefully you're not picked up. Then you've given custody to someone else, even if it's shared custody. Now, there may be reasons to do it, but you really want to think about it. First of all, there's the concept, this is on my outline, the concept of standing. What slide are we on? Slide 3, concept of standing. So not everybody can just go on down to court and get custody of a child, okay? So if I see my nice neighbor has a lovely child and I think, oh, I'd like to have custody of that child, and my neighbor thinks, oh, that's great, you're wonderful. Something happens to me, you should have custody of my child. That doesn't mean I have the right to just pop myself into court and we're all going to sign court documents. This is particularly the situation if the other parent opposes. Let's say my neighbor loves me, but her ex-husband doesn't like me so much. So when you're talking about custody, when you're talking about designations, you're talking about both parents, not just one. So there may be opposition from the other parent. When you're in custody, there's more formal issues of how you make service on someone. Are you going to be able to serve the other parent wherever he or she may be? Now, the pros, the reasons you might want to do it is if you're talking about, let's say I have 2 children, right? I have a 16-year-old and I have a 3-year-old. If I'm deported, I am probably, at least my experience with most undocumented families I've spoken with on this topic, if I'm deported, I'm probably going to want the 3-year-old to be sent to me. I am more likely to want the 16-year-old to stay here to finish school. That child may or may not be a citizen, but is probably very acclimated to the United States. So for the 16-year-old, it may well make sense to go ahead and do shared custody and just kind of get that done. This is where, you really do need to have a little bit of family law expertise in order to assess this. If whoever you're talking to wants to talk about custody, then you're going to need to send them to a family law practitioner to see if it's possible and weigh the pros and cons. In the meantime, however, until they can get to a family law practitioner, go ahead and do a designation, because you don't want to be without, just in case of emergency. I'm not going to talk about future modifications. Let's talk about the term caregiver designation. I made this up. You will not find this anywhere in any statutes. A caregiver, right? Someone who takes care of someone. I did not use the term guardianship because that's misleading. We don't have that in Pennsylvania outside of standby guardianship. And I don't know, designation sounded like a nice big word. So that's what it says. Many people will find, so for example, the poderes work sometime, right? The poderes do work sometimes because it depends on who's looking at your piece of paper and how nice and official it looks as to who will or will not accept it. Now, that doesn't usually work for travel purposes. It may not work for medical purpose, but it might work for some other reasons. So I thought, all right, let's put the word caregiver designation. That looks good. And this is not trying to hoodwink anyone. It should be the case that you have a right to make some declarations about your children. And just because we haven't codified it, it doesn't exist in statute anywhere, doesn't mean we can't do this. So I'm designating someone for whatever legal validity it has. I'm designating a caregiver for my child. So because if you look, document 6 is the New Jersey statute. In New Jersey, they have this. They have a form here in their nice statute. You can designate this for 6 months, a temporary guardian, for pretty much any reason. And this does often have to, the standby guardianship portion has to do if you've become incapacitated, just debilitated, there may be whatever may be going on with you. So right over the bridge in Jersey, there are some options to do this. And there's a form. So it's much easier than what the 10-page document that I've kind of put together. Now, this may not cover you for travel, and we're going to talk about travel a lot, but it may cover you for other things. New Mexico, I've got New Mexico here, that's document 7. They have this long power of attorney form. They have power of attorney for a minor child, where I said we don't have that in Pennsylvania. They do in New Mexico. They have all the forms right online for you. Same thing for California, that's document 8. I just wanted to show people some examples of what is and what is not out there. They have a nice long appointment of short-term guardian for minor child and durable healthcare power of attorney. So they have this 8-page form. You go online, you fill it out. Some of the terms I used are taken from some of these other documents too, so for the concept. So that's the status of the law. We're winging it, okay? So what are you going to do, all right? You've got this person in front of you, person or persons, the family may have come together. What are you going to do with it? Okay, you're going to start asking some questions, and this is where you're going to go. You're going to use this caregiver checklist I've provided, but let's start with jurisdiction. All right, fancy word for what state should I be in. First, you got to figure out, where does the child live? Okay, then where does the proposed caregiver live? Because I did one not too long ago. The child's here, but the proposed caregiver's in Texas. So you need to look, well, it's the sister of the mother. The mother and father came to me, the sister's in Texas. So I got to check out Texas, because I don't know if Texas is going to look at what I have and say, yeah, whatever. Texas may be a jurisdiction that has their own form. So you might want to fill out 2 forms. You don't know what you might have to do. So that's a kind of a stop and think, well, where's the caregiver? Is the caregiver over the bridge in Jersey? Now, that Jersey statute probably won't work because the child isn't in Jersey, but maybe. You got to talk to somebody in Jersey about that. Okay. Next, who's your caregiver going to be? This is where I always joke. It depends on what you want. If you've got the 16-year-old I was talking about, and this 16-year-old is going to stay with, Thea so-and-so, and they're going to finish high school, and Thea lives right here in Philadelphia or wherever, then it doesn't really matter if this person, the aunt in this case, is documented. She's not going anywhere, hopefully. She's staying here with the child. A designated caregiver does not have to be documented themselves. This is someone you trust who's really going to take care of this child. But what if we're talking about the 3-year-old I mentioned, okay? And mom and dad both agree, okay, if we're detained or deported, 3-year-old should go back to Guatemala with the mother once mother gets there. Well, somebody's got to travel with this child. You can't put a 3-year-old on a plane by herself. So you have to have someone who has the documented ability to travel themselves. It's always like the running joke. Let's find your local Puerto Rican who's going to get on the plane for you, because who else is going, right? And lots of people do know someone who has either is a U.S. citizen or is LPR, someone who has the ability to travel. But that may not be the person they want to leave the 3-year-old with. The 3-year-old may not know that person. So it is possible you'll be writing a caregiver designation with more than one individual involved, more than one caregiver. And that's perfectly fine, because like I said, we're kind of winging this anyway. And does the person, your caregiver, does not have to have a relationship to the child. Any familial type of relationship doesn't hurt. Because if you think about it, you're often wherever and your child's with this person. I always encourage people, my neighbor, she's Cristiana, she's very good. I was like, okay, that's one thing, but now you just, this is one of my cases. You want to leave your 4-year-old triplets with this senora who's, 70 years old. I'm sure she's very, very nice to leave it. How's that going to fly in about a year? Because you could be, or 3 months. You could be detained for a long time, and here's the senora with triplet boys, a 4-year-old. That's not what somebody needs. You are more likely to get more mileage out of a relative if you have one. People sometimes don't have relatives. They have who they have. They've made good friends here, and they do what they can. Be very careful, though, about choosing a caregiver. There are a lot of unscrupulous people out there. And you have to make sure it is someone you trust enough, de confianza, to make sure they're really going to do what you want. Because your kid's here with them. So be very, very careful. Not just someone you know from the neighborhood. Although someone strictly to travel, maybe, but certainly not to care for your child. Paternity. Paternity is always a hot topic. Who's the baby daddy? I've been writing about paternity for years. Okay, just because Daddy-O has not been seen in a long time doesn't mean he's out of the picture for these purposes. One parent, whether it's mother or father, can't just go signing all these legal documents without the consent of the father. So, is he the father? Who is the father? If you have, this is what I found to be the case. If you have a Central American, and this applies outside of Central America, obviously, any immigrant. If you have a child with a birth certificate and no father is listed at all, the mother can basically do as she pleases. But if there is, because the birth certificates are going to be needed, if there is a father and he's on there, you got to find him. And I have had, in the context of working with immigrant kids, I've done about 100 immigrant kid cases. Now I was just doing one this morning. And, we don't know where the father is. Like, come on, let's look. And the next thing you know, there he is in their Facebook, or he's wherever, somebody gets on the donkey and goes see the grandmother. Oh, yeah, there he is. So not to make light of it. I mean, a lot of times you really can't find people. People may, in fact, just be missing. We know that happens in the countries a lot because of the violence there. But lots of times we can find him if his name's on that birth certificate, and you're going to have to do something with him. Okay. It may be that, in fact, he's missing, maybe his parent, or maybe he's deceased. His parents, I've had lots of grandparents cooperate, the paternal grandparents kindly. They'll provide death certificates, things you need so you can proceed. Okay. But you do have to find him. It can't be, he hasn't done anything in the past 15 years. Well, I know, but he did something at some point there. So you got to have him. Or in the case of the mother, can both parents, it applies to both. Can both parents be located? And then do they agree as to what should happen? I had a case last year where mom was from Honduras, father was from Mexico. If they both got deported, they didn't agree where the child should go. They weren't on such great terms. So mom wanted the kid to go to Honduras. This is a young child, a 5-year-old. Dad wanted the kid to go to Mexico to him and his mother. So you can't designate something, two different things. The parents do have to be somewhat on the same page. Often, if you've had a completely uninvolved father, most men will go ahead and sign and defer to the mother, or vice versa. The mothers will defer to the father if they really haven't been involved. But if you've got people here, in particular if they're from different countries, you may not get much agreement on to where the child should go, and in which case there's not much you can do. But, well, maybe they can agree on a caregiver at a minimum, at least to temporarily figure out what to do with their children. So you have to see how much agreement is out there. Okay. I already talked about single parents, non-parent custodians. Oh, what if, let me see this, right? What if I'm here, I'm an aunt? I do lots of, when I'm doing special immigrant juvenile kids, lots of them are with aunts, uncles, cousins, adult siblings. So they may even have custody of a child, or they may not, but they're caring for a child. Can they use this? Maybe. But they may come to you, what if I get deported? What happens to my kid and my 2 nephews who I'm taking care of? In that case, they would need the cooperation of both parents. But you can do that. You can sign on everybody. Another hot issue you want to spot is errors in identification. Am I up there? This is document 9, for example, has, okay, other countries are super particular about the names of people. They have to be precise. Oh, look, see, recognition, right? Have to be precise. No hyphens in the last names. Oh, that's suddenly a different person. We can't have that. And, you know, a lot of U.S. birth certificates for kids have hyphen one place. They don't have hyphen another. The parents, let's say if you have a child born here, child is a U.S. citizen and also has the right to say, let's be a Mexican citizen. So on the U.S. birth certificate, their last names are hyphenated because nobody caught it at the hospital and nobody knows how to fix it. But on the Mexican birth registration, there is no hyphen. It's done a proper Hispanic last name. Well, what do you do with that? That causes problems. So one thing you may need to do is to tell whoever you're seeing, go fix your birth certificate. Get your child's birth certificates corrected. And you need a copy, a certified copy of your child's birth certificate. Form 9 is an application for a certified birth record. Fixing a birth record, you may have to talk to somebody. That sometimes is very easy, sometimes is not easy. Oh, come see me, I can help you with that. Yeah, I wind up doing that a fair amount for Hispanic families because if you fix it once, they'll never let you fix it again administratively, and then you got to, come and visit me and go to court about it. At least in Pennsylvania, you may. Every state has instructions on their state websites about, child was born in X place. What can I do? If you've got a foreign birth certificate, oh, good luck with your consulate, and you just have to see that's the problem, right? Then you have to deal with it. I do encourage people to. Oh, and because your birth certificate can cause you a problem with U.S. passport application. You are going to need, in most cases, not in every case, in most of designation cases, you're going to want the child to have a passport. You're going to want to be making copies of it because the child at a minimum, well, first of all, the child may be returning to the parent once the parent's repatriated. Or if not, let's go back to our 16-year-old. Our 16-year-old may want to go visit their parent over the summer, right? You don't want to be able to take that. You don't want to take that away. So get your passports in order now. Don't wait while everybody's here and can sign. So if this is a U.S. passport, back to we need everybody. Mothers and fathers both have to sign off on these things, unless the child is 16, actually. A 16-year-old only needs one parent. 15 or 16, one of those. Check it out. You have to, if the parent is not available to sign off on the passport, you're probably going to need a court order. Well, unless they're deceased, of course. But I often, for lots of people, wind up in court, again, having nothing to do with immigrants. They're fighting about should the child have a passport or not. And can one parent have the right to obtain the passport without the other? So let me see. Document 10, however, is a U.S. passport application. Each government, other countries, they have their own requirements about who can and cannot authorize a passport, although my experience with all the Central American countries, well, almost every country at this point, you do, except for some Muslim-dominant countries, you have to have the consent of both parents. There are a few countries still that will allow fathers to get them by themselves, but not for the most part. Okay? I've had a lot of people, when you're talking about dual nationals, speaking of passports, if a child has a right to be a citizen of 2 countries, you should go ahead and register that child as a country of both. It's easier to get it done in advance than later. And that has to do with re-entry into the home country. So child's born here, both parents are Mexican, so the child has a right to be a Mexican citizen. Most people will go down to the consulate and register that child. The child will get a Mexican birth certificate and a Mexican passport. And it makes the difference if they're going to go home as to how quickly they can be assimilated for going to school. If they return as a U.S. citizen, and this is, I think Guatemala does this as well. If they return as a U.S. citizen, if they enter the country that way, they're going to have immigration issues when they get there. and they're going to have to fairly quickly try to deal with things. Whereas as if the child enters Mexico as a Mexican citizen, they have some more immediate rights to education, things like that. Mexico is extremely particular, from what I can understand, more so than some of the other countries. But if you want to get your passports, take care of it. Never wait. Okay. The reason I talk so much about passports, if you look at document 11, lots of travel restrictions on taking children. As I was talking about earlier, we're talking trafficking of children, abduction by one parent of a child. You can't just roll up to the airport and get out of here. Now, you're not supposed to. I know lots of people, again, having nothing to do with immigrants. I'm Dominican. I'm going home to see my mother. Travels all the time with no problem. That is getting lucky at the airport, is what that is. Okay, that is not something you need to leave to chance. When you're doing one of these things, you want to remember, not to put the pressure on, but you better get this right, because someone is going to be counting on you that their papers are in order to protect their children, where they're sitting out in New York or wherever they may be sitting. So you don't want sloppy travel, or they're repatriated to Honduras, and they're sitting and can't get their child back because of some mix-up in the paperwork. So don't mess this up. And what I've attached, document 11, is from the Department of Homeland Security, some of their travel advisories. Even traveling, even if the parents are married, everybody's happy. One parent wants to go on vacation with the child to the Dominican Republic to visit abuela, whatever. You still technically need consent from the other parent. You're supposed to have a signed consent form. Interestingly, the Department of Homeland Security, document 11, document 12, which is U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, and then document 13, the U.S. Department of State website, they all kind of have slightly different instructions. The form that you'll see in my caregiver packet is modeled off of the Department of State website form with some extra stuff. Okay? And that was, like I said, document 13. I included this, I just took American Airlines. Document 14 is about traveling with infants, and you'll see also the restriction of an unaccompanied minor. You cannot just put a kid on a plane to go into it. You can send them to Florida with we don't say stewardess anymore, do we? Flight attendant, with a flight attendant monitoring them, but you can't do that into a foreign country under a certain age. That is why finding a caregiver who is able to travel is critical. That is also why your passport better be right, because people have them, well, we'll just put them on the plane to whoever, and that's not going to happen. Okay. It also brings up a practical point. Doing a caregiver designation is just some papers, and there may be very useful papers, but you have to think of the practical reality of this child's situation. And so one of the things you have to plan for, if you're a parent in this, potentially in the position of being detained or deported, you better have some money. Your caregiver may not be wealthy. You have to stash away money for a plane ticket, not only for your child, whatever number of children you have, if you want them to be reunited with you, but also for this caregiver. They're not coming up with, whatever amount of money. So start saving, and check out whatever airlines you're going to use, because some of the airlines have different rules about what they will and will not accept. That sounds like a heck of a lot of planning, but and it sounds crazy, but you really have to do it, because this is the last place you want issues. Document 15 is, I just printed this out. This is the implementation of Mexican regulations regarding minor travel. So I gave you the Department of Homeland Security, ICE, everybody else. Well, Mexico has their own thing. So you better figure that out, depending on where. And, look, if you're helping someone fill out this designation, you're not going through all of this right there with them. This is a lot of research, but you want to tell them, go check with your consulate to see what may or may not be required. I'm going to do this form for you, but there may be something particular you need to do with your own government. So and I found in document 16, so not only back to my 16-year-old, going to go to the summer to visit parents and then come back for school. How do you get back out of the country? There is an article here I found the Library of Congress, legal requirements for travel by unaccompanied minors exiting Central American countries. So does the kid have a green card? traveled on their El Salvadoran passport, went to El Salvador for the summer, needs to come back to school. Well, how do they get back out? So again, tell the person, go check with their consulate this is a short article, what may or may not be required. Because it may need to be something that you take care of here. Or, for example, getting their passport from El Salvador. Document 17 is the original version of what I created to create a designation, okay? We are going to skip that for a second. That's documents 18, 20. Yeah, I'm gonna come back to this. And we're gonna go through it in a little more detail, okay? I talked earlier about what not to do. Document 22. Look at this little pull there. No, no, and no. Do not use this. It might work for something, but do not trust this. Like I said, don't mess this up. Don't tell someone, oh, go get a pull there. It's just not going to work. Or you don't want to take the chance it will work. It might work for school. I don't know. But you don't want to take that chance. Document 23 is Philadelphia Legal Assistance, also also later in 2017, they put together a nice planning for custody and care of your children guide. They have it in English and in Spanish on their website. And I also found another really good resource, kind of a practical guide to things, which is document 24. This is from the Immigration, what do they stand for? Immigration Legal Resource Center in New York. They have in Spanish and English a really good preparedness plan, kind of what to do. How do you prepare yourself just in case I'm deported? And a lot of this talks about some of those practical things, like you better have money for plane tickets. They have this great little card in here if you are detained. We're going to talk about that for a minute. Part of your job, if you're helping people with this, you're not just filling out forms. Again, what do you do? If you're in the car and you get detained, what do you do? So this document has this great red card, if you look towards the end of it. I'm not talking to you, don't give your name. And I am not an immigration specialist, okay? So this I pick up from the number of immigration attorneys I work with. But one thing you better have the number of your caregiver on you. Because if whatever officer, whoever somewhere picks you up, doesn't speak English, how are you going to convey, my kids are sitting at school, they're getting out of school in an hour, somebody's got to go get them. So again, particularly with little ones, teenagers, they'll walk home, but somebody has to tell them too, right? So this is a big one. I know this is silly. You should carry a card around with your caregiver's number, and it should, and I prepare these for people. Please call Maria at such and such a number. She will take care of my children, okay? And they're not interested in sitting around waiting for DHS. They're like, okay, fine, let's call Maria and tell her. Good, we're done. And a lot of officers will go ahead and do that, especially if they know children are around. So that also works. And of course, the first thing, right? If you get picked up and you got your kids with you, start crying, right? All these immigration attorneys tell me that. Start crying immediately. Maybe you can get let go. It works sometimes, I'm told. If it doesn't work, same thing. Let me call Maria. Maria will come and get my children. My children are citizens. Maria will come and get them. And again, ICE is not wanting to sit there waiting for DHS to show up. So, or wherever, take the children. They're, okay, fine. So what does Maria have to do, right? Nobody wants to answer their cell phones from a number they don't recognize. Well, whoever your caregiver is better start picking up their cell phone. ICE, the police, whoever, they're not going to call 5 times, right? And text messages, oh, this is the police, come get so-and-so's kids. No, they better start picking up their phone. I know this sounds stupid, but they better. And you also better memorize, in case you don't have your card with you, you better memorize your caregiver's cell phone number. I know these sound like stupid things, but they make a difference. Okay. So where am I? All right. Is that clock right? All right. We're moving on time. So what slide am I up to? Those are all my documents. I don't know where am I? What have I not gone over?
Special needs and other issues.
Oh, special needs. Oh, yes. Special needs. So you're thinking about the family. They're thinking what they need to get done. You got to think about the kids. This never occurred to me until I don't know, like my 10th one of these that I did. The child in question was a 7-year-old boy who was severely autistic. And the mother said, okay, nobody's really taking care of my child. I don't have anyone here who's going to care for him. So if I'm deported, he needs to be sent to me he needs to be brought to me in Mexico. And her caregiver was actually she wasn't a therapist, but she was some type of social worker who worked with this child, had been working with him for years. I'm sorry, he was 9 actually. And she was the one who was going to take him. And what they really wanted to make sure we put in the document, the social worker, the little boy, sometimes, even though he knew her very well, he would have outbursts and just roll around on the ground and start yelling, "Get away from me." Now, if you see some kid, you're in the airport, and this kid starts screaming, "Get away from me," you're going to think, this woman is some type of kidnapper, and this kid's crying out for help. So the mother was very, very concerned that her son would start doing that. The son couldn't communicate necessarily that, no, he really does know this woman, and that he would be put into foster care and taken away from this woman. And she wouldn't really have any ability to get him back. So I amended my regular form, so you may need to do this, to spell out the child's diagnosis is this. If the child begins to roll around and scream at this woman, it's okay. This is a part of his disability. This is not someone trying to kidnap him. That's another reason you might, and I always do this. I attach to the caregiver designation is one stapled packet, the passports and pictures of everyone. So that they would have, so this caregiver, I got her passport, her picture, it was all bound together. So they would know, and particularly for this little boy, this is the woman he's supposed to be with. So you don't often have children with those types of disabilities, but if you do, you need to address this in your caregiver document. Second, and that could have happened to her anywhere, right? At the grocery store or something, and people are going to be questioning, who are you? And so that needed to be spelled out. But it's driving home the point, every family is different, and you need to look at everything that might affect this family and what could go wrong or right for him or her, the children involved. Domestic violence. This is an issue mostly in trying to locate the other parent for their signature. This is a tough one, because you're running the risk. Do I open up those old wounds? Do I go find this person who hasn't bothered me in years and maybe who almost killed me in exchange for doing a guardianship designation? In those cases, you can try to do a designation. Maybe somebody will accept it. Maybe they won't. I would amend the declaration, because in here, in the caregiver designation, it says we are both parents, there's no impediment to us, or I'm the sole living parent and I have the right to do this. Again, you're gonna have to monkey with this a little bit and try to address the situation, and it's better than nothing, because some people may really use it, especially the medical consent part. They're likely to use it. Public benefits. Some of the kids who are here and are citizens, they may have SSI, take the disabled child I mentioned, they may have food stamps. Your caregiver, again, may not be a well-heeled, wealthy person. They may need access to those benefits in order to care for the child for a short time or a long time. It depends. So that if the children in question are receiving any type of benefits, that should also be added into the caregiver designation. Depending on the benefit, and agencies change over time, you may need a special form from Social Security. Let's say if the child receives SSI, you might, I don't know what you might need. And I designed the designation to kind of last over time. That doesn't mean that that's the end of it. You may need to contact Social Security. Relocation, I'm not going to talk about that. You're really not supposed to relocate if there's a custody order in place. And if there's a custody order in place, a caregiver designation can't override a custody order. If I'm the mother, I only have partial custody, and maybe the father's already been deported, but I never went back and fixed that, I don't have the right to just do things without his consent. We can get both of them, then that's fine. But you want to clean up your custody orders, and that would also require conversations with family law practitioners. Another big, probably the last one, the big question is, how long is this effective? Well, because there's no statute about this, I don't know, it's effective for a while. I usually put 270 days. I picked that number for nobody. 9 months sounded good. I see my colleague here is like, why that? I don't know, why not? Here's why I said 270. If the child's being returned to the parent in the home country, that's probably, in many cases, enough time for the parent to be repatriated, right? If they have either they're out of detention, and immigration attorneys know much more about this than I do. Within 9 months, either they're out of detention, maybe they had something successful, or they've exhausted all their paperwork and maybe they're back in their home country, okay? In part because you don't want this to go too long, because there's no statutory authority for this. Travel consent, so I just picked 9 months. That will also, if it is going to be, the parent was repatriated, never heard from again, something happened to them, at that point, the caregiver had better go get custody. 9 months is a good chunk of time to have been caring for a child. It would probably give the caregiver standing to go to court for a custody case. There's nothing in custody law which says how long you have to have cared for a child before you gain the legal right to have custody, but 9 months is a pretty good chunk of time. It gives them time to get into court. You could do a different period of time, but that's the period of time I picked. Travel consent usually only lasts 1 year anyway. So it also may be that this designation, or at least the travel portion of it, has to be redone in a year, if hopefully nothing happens, there's no detention or deportation. Along with how long does this last is when does it become effective, right? People don't want to sign these and just start handing, here's everything, here's my children's birth certificates, here you go. It should be, and people can decide when does it become effective. If there's a couple together, it should only be effective when both of them have been detained or deported, or detained probably, not when only one of them is detained. And you want to talk with the person like when this is all supposed to become effective. It may be that the parents decide immediately upon our detention, take the 2-year-old and take the 2-year-old to my mother in Mexico. So you've got to get all the grandmother's documents, and she's going to be involved. How is your caregiver who's never met abuela going to know who to hand the child over to? So you have to, there may be some other people involved, and that has to do with the effective date. You want to, this is something I do with lots of clients, you want to help them be organized, right? So they're going to have this 10-page document, it's going to get signed and notarized. We're going to go through it here in just a minute. And they are going to need, I give them a folder because I'm a little A-type. So they get a folder from me. It has their nice notarized document in it. I tell them, put your child's passport, put your child's birth certificate, put money for the airlines, put some extra money. If you have a cash card to a bank account, a MAC card or something, you better put an extra one in there, because whoever's taking care of your kid is going to need this. You know, they're going to need money. Anything else? Now, I'm not giving that to the caregiver right away. I'm going to put it in my house. If I have a child who's old enough, they're going to know where it is. If I don't have a child who's old enough, some trusted person is going to know where this big folder is in my house. And it's all going to be there together. And so, heaven forbid, something happens, my sister will know, all right, it's time, let me go get the packet. The caregiver should have a copy of the authorization, but not all the documents and the originals and all of that. Okay, now let's quickly fly through these forms. So the way I did it, and I was trying to minimize the number of notary signatures that you need. Oh wait, that's my checklist. Wait, go to my checklist for just a second. So the checklist, that's just to help you. You're sitting there, you're talking to this family, you're doing this pro bono, you've never done this before, you're freaked out because you hate family law, and you're like, oh my God. Then go through this. This is a little cheat sheet to help you think through, like, can I or can I not do this? Or what should I or shouldn't do, okay? You absolutely should not be sitting at your computer trying, or have a printed out form trying to fill it out. That does not work for this. So if you're going to help someone pro bono, you got to have a laptop. Okay. So the first couple, now we can go to the actual form. Do we have that? Is that what I called it now? Yes. Okay. So like I said, I changed it from when I first did it. I mean, after you do this a few times, you think, oh, this works and this doesn't. This is my cheat sheet. Like, what do I have? Do I have everything here? This is just my note page. And I use it as a cover page for the caregiver designation. Just like custody agreements or divorce agreements, there's X's at the, I'm pointing to I don't know who. The X's at the bottom are where you should have each party put their initials. Each party should sign initial every single page. And that's I don't know. That just seems to be good practice in contract law. And again, it looks more official, right? Makes it look more impressive. So the first, we can go to the next page. Keep going. Oh, wait a minute. There's a page. Go back one more time. One back. Okay, so there it starts. This is the caregiver designation. You put the kids. I put all this language about we revoke all former wills and codicils, even though I just told you in this training you can't leave your kids to anybody in your will anyway. Once again, why not? Maybe in some states you can. I don't know. You put your relationship to the child. This is the portion of the document which is the general designation. This is the portion which has no real basis in Pennsylvania law, but is cobbling together different things and is an expression of your intention. And that's the reason it says that. It's an expression of your intention. Go to next slide. You can do this how you want. I tend to do this by section. There should be a translation. You want to make sure everybody who's involved in this knows what they're signing. So I start with the caregiver designation, but after each provision, I include a translation. And do not make fun of my translation. Everybody from every different country tells me it's wrong, and I got tired of it. You want to fix it, fix it. It is what it is. So the notice on this slide, the caregiver also needs to accept this responsibility, right? Do not have someone to come in and tell you, oh, my sister's going to do this. Meanwhile, your sister's husband has no clue about this. And it's like, you got to be kidding me. I'm not taking these 4 brats in the house. They have to accept responsibility. If I'm doing this as an attorney, I also do a paragraph. That's probably the next slide. Keep going. The slide, they seem out of order. I'll send this out again to anybody who's watching. The attorney preparation, I get the parents are usually my clients, but if anything happens, they want me to help the caregiver. So if you're doing this, I include a section on a waiver of conflict of interest, basically, to protect myself, so that if the caregivers need some help, if they run into a snag and they need help, I can help them. So that initial caregiver, you just need to read it, and it has all types of stuff in it. I'm not going to go into it here in the training. Next thing I attach is the Pennsylvania medical consent. Again, this is a standard form. This is one that you can just fill in the blank with, okay? And that is a standard Pennsylvania statute and form. Next, I include, do I have travel next? Should be travel? Yes, consent to travel. As I said, I took the State Department form, I monkeyed with it a bit. I put all types of passports. I don't know what passport the child may be traveling with. You're gonna see, I put the passport information for the person who will be doing the traveling, when it's valid from. There are 2 different forms. If you're giving a third party the right to travel with your child, that's one form. If you're just giving the other parent the right to travel with your child, that's a different form. I've had lots of people come in and say, if the husband's picked up, the mother's like, I've got little kids, there's no way I can work, no way I can support us. As soon as he's picked up, I'm going home. So she needs his consent, which she won't necessarily be able to get that easily from York, to go ahead and travel and get on a plane and go home to whatever their home country is. So you may need both of those depending on the situation. So I have both of these in the document. And, you have to include, not only can I fly to Mexico, but in case I don't have a direct flight, it's okay for me to stop in wherever I got to stop in El Salvador, or stop in Mexico to get to El Salvador, whatever you got to do, because you have to pass through customs for layovers a lot. So you have to enter that country's sovereign territory. So your consent to travel should say you have a right to also lay over in another country. You may not be able to say right away, oh, it's El Salvador. You don't know where your flight's going to be, but you have to mention that. That's why that's in here, so that you can get through whatever inspection you need to get through and on your way to wherever you're going. The next slide, keep going. Keep going. Okay, what I don't see up there, the Philadelphia School District has something called, they've had this for many, many years, delegation of parental responsibility. Philadelphia is the only school district I know that has this. I've been trying to get Ben Salem to do it. Is it up there? There you go. They'll accept this. This, again, has nothing to do with immigration status or immigrants or anything. But if your child's going to live with grandma for school purposes, I guess it's because nobody wants to get into the Philadelphia school district. I'll just let you do this. You just fill out a form, and it's in Spanish and English. This is the standard form that the school district here recognizes. If the child's not in Philadelphia, you're going to include the whole education piece within your caregiver designation, because your caregiver is going to have to go to the parent-teacher conference, do all these things for the child while they're at school until whatever happens. Same thing, every school district has an emergency contact form. Change that immediately. Because again, you may be detained on your way to work, and here's your 7-year-old sitting at school. That school needs to know immediately, forget your caregiver business, that your child can be released to so-and-so. What's going to happen when well, they'll do this, right? 6, 7-year-olds get off buses by themselves and start walking home. Where's that kid going? That school needs to know, wait, keep this kid. We're going to release him to so-and-so. That's really critical to get that school done. And I'm done. I don't know if we have questions. Did I do it? Did it in an hour? All right. No? Questions? No? That's because my training was so magnificent. Oh, Senor Gonzalez has one. Yes. Okay, we have a question.
We could have fill out the form for the school district of Philadelphia, and somebody gets picked up, and so they'll deliver the child to the person. However, let's say you did not finish your guardianship stuff, and now the person has the kid to the school district delivered them. Let's talk about that scenario.
Okay, so the question is, what if you did part of what you needed to do, but you didn't finish or whatever? Let's say, so you filled out your form. We all, right? Any of us who have kids, we have somebody who's an emergency contact for our children, right? My sister-in-law is mine at the school. So my sister-in-law goes and has my child because the school released her to my child to her. But then what is she going to do? Well, she's going to be able to, if you think a lot of this is about life, right? So nobody's going to know really what's going on for a while until that child may need some medical treatment, or you got to do this or you got to do that. So ideally, this whole plan gets put in place prior to someone's detention or deportation, but a caregiver can have the child for a little while. The school's not going to know who's sending the child to and from school necessarily. You have some time to maneuver. You run into a problem when the parents are sitting in York. Isn't that still the place, I think? Berks. They're in Berks. I don't know. Parents somewhere, you can't just get to them that easily and start doing all these things. They may not have their papers. Where's their passport? You don't know where everything is. But as a practical matter, I've seen people get by having kids for a good chunk of time before anyone actually challenges them, particularly if the child doesn't require medical treatment. So you can limp along, but certainly getting a child sent back with the parent who's being repatriated, that travel's a big deal. That's not going to happen. And emergency treatment, sure, a child can get emergency treatment. Any hospital is going to treat a child in case of emergency. But then what happens? Maybe the child needs some more vaccinations to continue in school. You're not just going to get vaccines done because that's not an emergency situation. So you come up with all types of impediments, but you're okay for a little bit in most cases.
And that Philadelphia emergency contact form does not have to be notarized.
No, the emergency contact form is just like, the question is whether or not the emergency contact form has to be notarized. No, it does not. That's just a simple form that every kid fills out on the first day of school. The delegation of parental responsibility, again, it's a very easy form that should be notarized. And that is in the case in which you're stating my child is residing with so-and-so, but you don't want to turn that in until your child actually is residing with so-and-so. So that is a piece. It gets a little tricky with when do you execute it. You're executing in advance, so you have all your ducks in a row. But then the school's like, wait, they've been living with you for how long? So that gets a little tricky, but I say go ahead and execute it just in case, because you never know what may come up. That does get tricky. There is no such form. Let's say your caregiver lives in Bensalem. There is no Bensalem form. So that gets, the suburban, particularly the counties that surround Philadelphia, they are very particular. They're not going to let anybody say, oh, my kids are going to live with so-and-so absent a court order. But I think that the school districts, if you have this big caregiver designation packet and you can show the parent's been deported and you're the new caregiver, that they would probably accept in order to register a child in school. because the child may not be able to stay in his or her school. That's a particularly difficult one. If your caregiver lives elsewhere, child's been going to wherever, Furness High School, well, that kid's got a quick change because they have to go live with the other parent, the other caregiver. Practically, can the kid stay in Furness for a week or so? If you can transport them down there, sure. But at some point, they're going to need to transfer, which can be very traumatic for the kid. So you definitely want your paperwork in order. If suburban schools give anyone a problem, who should they reach out to? I don't know. How about the Education Law Center? And there is Pennsylvania law on this, and every school board's different about how they approach it, every school district. Most of the surrounding school districts have been good. They're not reporting undocumented kids. They're not doing anything like that. They're not reporting undocumented families. Even in conservative Bucks County, I have not seen that. Fear of going to the court, that raises another point. If you need to go to the court, do not be afraid to go to family court. I don't know what happens in other courts, but I've been doing this for 24 years now. I have never seen anyone picked up for lack of immigration documentation at family court. In the past 4 years, I think I've done 100 cases, nearly 100 at this point, cases of special immigrant juvenile kids, and plenty of undocumented caregivers and parents. No one cares, no one asks. They're busy. They don't have time to sit on the phone and wait for ICE either. So knock on wood, I don't have any wood, but I have not seen it. So people should not be afraid about that. That raises another point. If the parents are deported, that may, and the child's not going back with them, and the child is undocumented, him or herself, that actually may open up an immigration option for the child. That, again, you're not going to do that as you're preparing this paperwork, but you want to think about it. If the parents are deported and they're left with Aunt so-and-so, that child who is undocumented themselves may then qualify for special immigrant juvenile status, because the deportation may not have been voluntary, but the child is basically left abandoned here in the United States. And I do a lot of work with that, and you talk to, I think most immigration attorneys know about it at this point. So don't forget your immigration remedies. That's it. No, more questions.
So we talked a lot about, once a parent is detained and then sent back to their home country, how to get their child back to them. In how many scenarios is it the better or preferable long-term solution for the child to remain here?
If the case is, the question is, I think the basic question is, when you're doing one of these, how many times do the parents want the children returned to them in the home country, as opposed to how many times do they want them to stay here in the U.S.? I would say so far, 80% of the people I've spoken with want their children returned to them, because they, especially if they're little children, and people with younger children tend to be the ones who are coming to obtain these documents. At least 80% of the time. I've only seen when it's an older child who's been here a long time and is, going to finish high school and has the ability to go back and forth and visit. Most of the time, they want the kids returned to them at some point. Even that little boy who was severely autistic, part because who was going to care for him, and despite the fact that whatever treatment, he had other health issues too. The treatment he would receive here was, and he's a U.S. citizen. That child was a citizen, would be far superior here, but who was going to take care of him? So he needed to be returned to her village.
Okay. And follow up to that. I'm not an attorney. I'm not familiar with the.
That's okay. A lot of attorneys aren't either.
What's that?
A lot of attorneys aren't either. Familiar with lots of stuff.
How long is the process usually from like detention to the whole legal process?
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. So the question is, how long does this all take? From the day I'm detained, how long might it be before I'm released somewhere? There you go. See, I don't know either. I work with lots of immigration attorneys who need family law help, but I think that changes day to day. I'm convinced that's not a fixed target. But the reason I use that 270 days, attorneys have told me in general, if you've already got a deportation order against you, you're kind of out of options, right? So you will be home sooner rather than later. So that's the reason I figure under 9 months, you're probably where you're going at that point. And I could be completely wrong. And what isn't the Congress fighting now about how many beds we're going to have? So maybe for people being detained, that's up in the budget right now. So more beds, they stay here longer, or I don't know. But that is actually a reason. In my travel consents, I will say that they can be released to usually the grandmother, also in the home country. Let's say, the parents are detained for a long time, and whoever the caregiver is can't take care of them that long, then they need to go somewhere. So you pick another person, and you describe them in your caregiver doc, because some of the abuelitas don't have their own identification. I mean, I've even had to describe them, put pictures in, all types of stuff. So you may have to do that. Because but I think 9 months will usually get you somewhere. Fortunately, I think everybody who's done this with me hasn't been deported, hasn't been detained. So I don't know, which is good, right? Maybe it's like some lucky talisman or something. I don't know. It hasn't been needed. So, or only one parent has been deported. I've had that. And we've had to have immigration counsel running over to Berks, York, wherever, I had to do one of these in 24 hours because the immigration attorney was going out there. That was going to be the one time they could get the father's signature. So I have had in those cases that we've had to use these when one person is being deported. Okay. You want to ask another question?
When you talk about the disabled child, maybe think about this. What about people here who are taking care of someone who is not their child? Who is
right. So the question is, what do you do if you're caring for a child who is not your own child?
Or a sibling who's like permanently disabled and requires your care.
As an adult?
Yeah, as an adult.
Well, that's definitely trickier. That gets into, if the person you're caring for is an adult who's incapacitated, then you should have guardianship yourself, and that's through orphans court if you're in Philadelphia. And that gets tricky for immigrants because orphans court's not necessarily, but not necessarily going to award an undocumented person guardianship, because you have to do all this financial paperwork. It's not that easy. I've seen a lot of non-English speaking folks who may be citizens or LPRs, but they just have a lot of trouble. I think you can try to do something, but it's much, much harder in some ways with an adult, because the only process is the guardianship of an incapacitated individual. That's tough. I haven't had to do that. That's sad. Okay.
Well, I don't think we have any more questions.
Okay. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah. So
good luck.
We're going to send out to everyone who registered the information about the link so that you can access the documents, as well as the PowerPoint presentation. Yeah, that should be it. Thank you.
I can make available, I think I have a Word version of the actual caregiver designation, and that if you are doing this pro bono someone, you're welcome to use it. If you are going to make a business of this, you're not welcome to use it. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Am I still visible?